Fox 5 and Hot 97 present Street Soldiers with Lisa Evers.
I'm so glad you're joining us for this episode of Street Soldiers on the Rikers Island crisis. I'm your host, Lisa Evers. Rikers Island has never been a place anyone has ever wanted to go. The very name of the New York City jail is synonymous with violence, fear, and injustice. But now conditions are at a dangerous boiling point for inmates, staff, and correction officers. The question is why?
The conditions in Rikers Island represent a humanitarian crisis. It represents both the public safety and the public health crisis.
Rikers Island could be at the lowest point in its nearly 90-year history. There were at least 12 inmate deaths and nearly 1,200 correction officers assaulted in 1 year. Due to pandemic casualties, hiring freezes, and laws requiring bail, the inmate population grew at a time staffing sharply declined. The daily reality inside also deteriorated. Detainees held in shower stalls with no toilets and left to use plastic bags for days. Female inmates with no feminine hygiene products. Inmates with untreated open wounds, and others openly carrying weapons.
What we need to do is get people off this island. There is no reason that if you are charged with a crime and you have not been found guilty of a crime, that you then serve time.
Benny BOSCIO Jr., president of COBA, the Correction Officers Union, says correction officers are 85% minority, 65% city residents, and 55% women. Close to 1,800 were sick with COVID-19. He says inmates have a right to intake in 24 hours or less, 1 hour of daily outdoor activity, and prompt access to medical attention, but they all require correction officer supervision.
It's a big problem for us to be understaffed. We need like 2,000 correction officers. Not hiring in 3 years is the major problem here. We can't provide the inmates their services if we don't have enough staff. It's an inhumane situation for us. You know, we're overworked. We're having to work 25 plus hours straight with no meal breaks. You know, it's like modern day slavery.
Some correction officer duties like perimeter security will be handled by private security guards. The NYPD is assisting with transporting inmates to court appearances. DOC Commissioner Vincent Schiraldi says, "We have been very clear about the many challenges we have been facing for months, as well as everything we are doing to address the underlying conditions."
You need to switch out the people that are in charge and put some people in that know what they're doing. It's clear that we have a level of incompetence at the apex of the Department of Corrections.
There's many layers to this issue. Let's find out more from our panel. Joining me is Ainsley Johnson. She's a second-year law student. She was formerly incarcerated at Rikers Island on a case that eventually was acquitted, but she went through some unbelievable experiences, which we're going to hear about in just a few moments. Ainsley, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
We really appreciate it. Also joining us is Dr. Darrin Porcher. He's a criminal justice professor and former NYPD lieutenant and law enforcement commentator on many networks. Dr. Darrin, thank you so much for being with us.
Always a pleasure, Lisa.
We appreciate it. Also with us is TERESA REDDISH. She was a correction officer on Rikers Island for 21 years, going from the late 90s into the 2000s. Saw a lot of different changes as well. We're going to find out what she has to say about everything. TERESA, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate it. Also with us is New York State Assemblyman ZOHRAN MAMDANI. He was on Rikers Island just very recently, and also last spring saw firsthand some of the conditions that made us want to do this show and really talk about this in depth. ZOHRAN, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's always a pleasure.
We really appreciate it. ZOHRAN, I want to talk with you about this because I saw you right after you came out of Rikers Island in this month of September, and you seemed deeply disturbed by what you saw. Could you tell us what you saw?
Absolutely. You know, Lisa, it was a horrifying visit to the island. And I say that as somebody who visited in April and saw already how deep the crisis was at that time. But even compared to then, it was at a different level of devastation. I spoke to individuals who were incarcerated on Rikers who had not seen the outside, who had not been out of their cells and outside in fresh air for over 3 months. I spoke to individuals who were incarcerated who were in the intake facility, a facility where you're supposed to be between 24 to 48 hours for 7 days, and who had not had any access to a place to sleep beyond the floor or a place to go to the bathroom. People were defecating in the corner of the room. I spoke to individuals who told me that they were set to go to rehabilitation facilities, and all that was stopping them from actually going to those facilities was making the video interview in time. And every time that they were set to go for the interview, they would arrive at best 1 hour after the interview and be told they had to wait another month. So for 3 months, this one man had been waiting for that interview. And there was a corrections officer who took pity on his case and gave him the number for the rehabilitation facility and said, call them, maybe you can do the interview over audio. And he called and they said, I'm sorry, the process has to be done by video. And so they're stuck in this limbo through no fault of their own, and they may die there because of the conditions on the island.
And we're going to talk about that. Darrin, for years, we've talked about Rikers Island. Rikers Island has been, the subject of a lot of investigations, all sorts of different management changes, leadership changes, that type of thing. Why can't we get it right with this?
Well, Rikers Island has been a very broken system for years on end. When you do a contrast and comparison between Rikers Island and the federal correctional facilities, you see a diametric difference. The way the facilities are run on Rikers Island is, I want to say, very archaic. There's no automation. A lot of how inmates are being counted or recorded is through a series of cards and not a computer system. The automation system has never gotten up. So as a result of that, I think that they've been very resistant to change within the Department of Corrections. And so as a result, things are going backwards as opposed to moving forwards.
Aisley, tell us about your experience. You were in there a couple of years ago, and in the only facility there that's for women. Tell us about what you were going through.
I was held at Rose M. Singer Center from September 2018 to May 2019, I'm sorry. During that time, you felt kind of the push of new corrections, as it's termed, as well as the pull of old corrections, as it is also termed, where you do have an attitude and an environment where there's a huge resistance to change, and it's not just when it comes to the automation. It permeates its way through every part of the system. So even with the civilian review boards, I can tell you with certainty that the officers, blue shirts and white shirts, do the bare minimum that they can to check those boxes to pacify the civilians. And as an inmate, if you want some of the services that you are federally entitled to, such as fresh air at least 1 hour a day, your counsel visits, being able to have
being able to make a phone call.
Being able to make a phone call, I can tell you from my own personal experience that the only thing that gets respect is disrespect. And being a cordial, articulate, patient person, you will die there. If you allow and do not kind of if you're not the squeaky wheel, you will not get the oil. And it is the problematic inmates that have kind of internalized that reward system. And unfortunately, it's some of the most barbaric inmates that do get access to some of the services, and they won't be the ones that will benefit from them, right?
Right, and basically work in the system. Teresa, let me
exactly
tell us what years you were active as a correction officer on Rikers Island.
I was active as a correction officer between December 1996 and December 2017.
And what kind of changes did you see on the job while you were there, witnessing all of these things that are going on, trying to keep everybody safe and keep yourself safe as well?
Well, a lot of it had to do with management changing. We had a lot of people there with not a whole lot of experience becoming supervisors, and they didn't know how to work in an institution. So when you have somebody come on the job with 2 years and they don't know how to handle an institution with 20, 100 guys in a housing area, and they get promoted, and it changes the whole culture of the jail because they don't know.
So you were telling me when we spoke before the show that it was kind of like a conflict between people that were wearing the uniform and the badge had street smarts. They were from the community. They
right.
basically understood the street culture, if you will, that so many of the people that were inside were a part of. And then the what we might call the book smart people were the ones that were making these decisions that didn't necessarily make things run more smoothly. Is that what you were? Is that correct? What you were telling me?
And that is correct. That is so correct, because I came from a ghetto. I came from a bad neighborhood, and I found that the officers that came from my hood did the job better than somebody that was college educated. because the inmates could be intimidating to them. So when you tell an inmate not to do that, they won't do it. If you feel like you they're going to intimidate you, you're going to be afraid to tell them what to do.
We're back with you right after this. Police Commissioner Dermot Shea has said that the people who are on Rikers Island right now in late 2021, many of them are very violent criminals who have been arrested in these gang and gun raids and for other violent crimes. Darren, what do you say to that? That this is not the turnstile jumper who got on there or somebody who was drinking with an open container, because they're not getting arrested for that anymore. What do you say to that?
That's somewhat accurate. In the wake of bail reform, many people have been giving desk appearance tickets to return back to court on a later date. We have the more violent offenders that are being housed on Rikers Island, and that's an actual fact. So when you look at the quantitative statistics in connection with who's housed on Rikers Island, they are the more violent criminals. This is something very different than, look, I'll give you your chance. I'll give you a chance to respond. This is something that's happened since the pandemic. Now, there's an evolution in corrections that's occurring right now in terms of how we're looking to incarcerate people. One of the things that we want to take note to is what happened with Khalif Browder years ago, where we had many people that were arrested for crimes and they were being detained longer than if they were actually sentenced for that offense.
Was a horrible case.
Right. So I think that really put a spotlight on the Department of Corrections and how we incarcerate people as detainees.
Ainsley, but tell us what it does to somebody who's inside, because there you are. You have a college education, you have a master's degree, you were working in business, in the music industry, and other areas, and then you get arrested on very serious charges, taken into Rikers Island. Thank God that your attorney Philip Hamilton got the charges dismissed. You beat the case, but what was it
acquitted. We had to take it to trial.
I'm sorry. Oh, wow. Okay, that it was acquitted. And then, but you were there for almost 2 years. What does that do to you psychologically?
There's really the disconnect between what we think is happening on the street and what actually happens when you get there. They're worlds apart. I have been in intake and heard the number 2 and number 3 in the facility laughing to each other as they're discussing some of these reforms and saying, as long as there's remand, we will always have jobs. So, there's definitely an attitude within corrections itself, that it's a career, and it is a career that people have been in for generations. And there are some people that intend to keep it that way. So even though there is, this progressive wave on the street, what is happening in those facilities, you are feeling, ripples that have been absorbed 4 and 5 times before you're actually seeing anything precipitate on the island itself.
What was the worst thing that happened to you when you were there, would you say?
Well, there was technically a riot within my first 2 weeks. When we talk about medical care, I have tended to at least 5 fellow detainees with chronic seizures because it takes medical staff so long to get to the unit. You name it. I've seen assault on staff, and that is what they term any physical interaction between an officer and an inmate. And in every instance that I witnessed myself, it was not the inmate that aggravated that situation. I've watched all the documentaries, and I did that before I was actually placed in that situation. We think
that the inmates didn't aggravate. What I don't understand that.
And the instances that I personally witnessed, the inmates were not the ones that were aggravating the situation.
But did you witness incidents where?
So in other words, you're saying staff aggravated the situation.
In the instances that I personally witnessed, yes, that is what happened.
But
I'm not saying that is what happens across the board. There's no way I can know that. All I can say is that what I personally witnessed with my own 2 eyes, that is what my truth is.
Teresa, what about that? Because there have been a lot of correction officers that have been assaulted too.
Of course, and correction officers do their job. Our motto was, when you go in, you want to come in the way you came. The way you went in, you want to come out the way you are. We're dealing with 100 inmates in a unit and only 2 officers that we have to attend to. Matter, they get 3 meals a day. We make sure they have clean linen. They do linen exchange. They have commissary. They go to commissary. once a week. They have visits. So all of that, we was running the jail.
Zohran, when Jumaane Williams came out of the Rikers jail after the visit that you all had, he said that he felt that it was at a boiling point, that it was something, it was a matter of time before there was an Attica-style explosion. Is that just political rhetoric or is that reality?
I think that's reality. And, you know, what speaks to that is when we came out of the jail, 10 people had died in the year. Today, during this interview, another 2 people have died since that time. If that doesn't spell out a crisis, I don't know what does. And I want to make something clear. We often talk about individual culpability. Did this person do that? Did that person do this? What's happening on Rikers is a systemic failure. And what we need to do to resolve this is systemic solutions. And what that means is getting people off the island as quickly as possible.
Darren, what about what Zohran was saying about the people that are in there right now?
Well, I think he has a right to his opinion. My opinion is basically we experienced a meteoric rise in crime over this last summer of 2021. And the citizenship of the 8.5 million people that reside in New York City wanted some answers. We felt that it was necessary to take people into custody that committed these violent acts in our city. The judges make the assessment as to who goes to Rikers Island and who doesn't. As I mentioned earlier, with bail reform, we see far less people that are making it to Rikers Island. It seems as if you have to go through a series of hurdles to actually get to Rikers Island.
Yeah, but
going back to
Zohran says now more people are getting bail.
Well, if that's his opinion, we'll leave that being his opinion. But sir, I didn't interrupt you. So as I was saying, as we progress, I think we're getting away from the focal point here in what's happening on Rikers Island and how can we make it better. And it starts with the political structure and the Department of Corrections working in unison for a strategy that can reduce the assaults, because this is not something that I'm hearing, but the inmate-to-inmate assault problem is a real issue on Rikers Island. Coupled with
one of the elected officials that was on the tour in September said basically he saw somebody walking around with a knife, that they were just walking around there with a knife. Teresa, speak to the danger when you hear these stories and you hear about what's going on now. I'm sure you still hear from some of your former colleagues about what's happening there.
Well, when I was there, we controlled the violence pretty well because we had specialized units that came in and we did technical searches every day. Every day at jail, we would shut down the jail and we would do search for weapons, search for any kind of contraband. And we pretty much kept the jails pretty safe. Occasionally we have a fight or a riot, but for the most part, the jails were pretty safe back then because we had specialized units. We did searches, sometimes midnight searches. We'll do early morning searches and find contraband. And that eliminates a lot of the assaults on staff and inmates because we all want to be safe.
Ainsley, in terms of your experience there, did you feel in fear for your life or your safety while you were there in the women's?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. It's Rikers Island, and it has earned that name. Earned its reputation. When we talk about a search, let's talk about what a search is and what that does to an inmate. Granted, it is necessary to keep the facility safe. On a daily basis, that is having your bed stripped, your belongings dumped out, your clothes rambled through, you stripping naked, you bending over, you squatting every day. Like, that is what we're saying is required for 6,000 people to be safe every day. That does not make sense.
Ainsley, I want to ask you, as somebody who was formerly incarcerated, what's the one thing that you think could be done to make things better?
Release the detainees and allow them to fight their cases from the outside.
All cases or just certain cases?
All cases. I mean, if we're worried about, the most violent people reoffending, one, you may be surprised at how people see things differently after escaping a near-death experience like Rikers Island. But also, if they are going to reoffend, they will. And they'll reoffend and they will be rearrested and they will be held in a facility that is designed to house people.
Teresa, in terms of something that could be done from everything that you're learning about the current situation, what would you recommend based on your professional experience?
More oversight and more officers, more professional officers. That's basically it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Street Soldiers on the Rikers Island crisis. You can share it and watch it again on our Fox 5 NY YouTube page. Remember, use your mind. It's your best weapon. I'm Lisa Evers. Let's push for peace, love, and justice for all.